Okay, hello there. Welcome to week 5, where we are going to be reading book 2 from Hard Times. That would be the reaping chapter, right? So I mentioned sort of last week that you might want to think about the structure of this book and the way there's 3 parts. The story takes place in a rather urban setting, especially for part 1 that you've seen so far. There will be some sections where they get a little out of town. Hope that's not really a spoiler in the second section, but there's nothing really agricultural about this story, which makes it somewhat ironic, right? In other words, irony, for some people it's a difficult concept, but it's pretty simple. Really, it's just a lot of people misuse the term, which I think does lead to confusion. It's actually really when you say one thing is something that's kind of the opposite of what it's supposed to be, or there's some sort of, what's the word I want? Contradiction in terms as well. There can also be dramatic irony where we, the readers or viewers, know something that the characters do not know. But for the contents here, we're talking, agriculture and the machinery of the city are kind of opposites. So there's kind of an inherent irony. It's almost like Dickens is kind of winking at us a little bit. But to sow is to plant. Usually you plant seeds. To reap is basically to harvest when you cut down, say, the wheat that you planted. And you might know the saying, you reap what you sow, which, I don't know, that sounds pretty obvious. Yes, I planted wheat seeds, so I will later cut down wheat. But, of course, it's also meant metaphorically, and I do believe Dickens is using that not only as an ironical way of organizing this mostly urban book, but also as a play on that you reap what you sow concept. So if you plant seeds of hate, you will be harvesting some hate later in your life, right? Hate will grow in your life if you plant seeds of it. If you plant violence, you'll receive violence. It's basically you get what I guess what goes around comes around in a sense, but it's a little more than that, right? So here we see what kinds of seeds are planted in part 1, which I'm not going to talk about too much because I have discussion questions that I'm going to be posting final thoughts on in the coming weeks. I'm a little behind on posting for poetry, but so are most of you, and that's kind of why I've been holding off on some of those. But I do have my final thoughts for week 1 and 2. If you haven't read those, you should definitely go back and check them out. Let me know if you have questions on them. I haven't seen any. If I'm missing them, you can send me an email and say, hey, I posted something. It'd be cool if you'd respond. That's no problem. We can do that. But I can talk a little bit. I do want to talk a little bit about some of the stuff that happened in part 1. Basically, what we're doing here is we're planting seeds, right? And the seeds that are being planted are the seeds of facts only, right? The sort of seeds that are being planted is this educational system, this Grandian, we might say, educational system where we want to root out fancy. No one's allowed to wonder or fancy or have imagination, only facts. Let's just rely on facts, no sentimentality, which they might actually, that's probably what they would call compassion, right? So that's the sort of framework here. And we're going to see, you're going to see in part 2 what becomes of that, what grows out of that kind of seed that was planted in these children. Because they're going to be adults. You'll see that they're adults. And again, I don't think that's a spoiler. You'll see that pretty early on once you get into that part. We meet most of the principal characters in part 1. Obviously, we're going to, I don't know if it's obvious, but obviously, since it's a Dickens story, we're going to meet more as the story goes on. Some characters might drop away for a while. Maybe they come back. That's a pretty typical Dickensian move to do. Dickens also likes to use lots of funny names for things, names that almost sound like the character or almost sometimes really on the nose, as they say. Right, so we've got the teacher. I don't know if you remember the teacher at Gradgrind's school. His name is Machokumchild, which literally just sounds like the guy chokes children. He's choking the life out of them. He's choking the imagination out of them. Right, and then there's things like one of my favorite phrases that pops up throughout the book is the deadly statistical clock. As in, Dickens is telling you, this idea of facts only, of only relying on reason and what can be counted and quantified, is kind of deadly. Also, we have, this is just on page 42 of our text, right? he says, life at Stone Lodge, and I love to live at Stone Lodge, right? Sort of this inhuman, cold, unfeeling thing. Life at Stone Lodge went monotonously round like a piece of machinery which discouraged human interference, right? So again, this idea of machinery as being somehow inhuman, though it was created by humans, there's something dehumanizing about the machinery of a city. But then, of course, we have one of the more interesting characters in part one is this Louisa. Not Louisa. Sissy. I didn't ask you guys any questions about Sissy, but maybe some of you guys wrote about it. I haven't looked at every one of your posts from last week quite yet. But she adds extra layer of irony, where she is actually a really good person, and that's why she can't learn this lesson of facts only. She says things like, I thought I could know whether it was a prosperous nation or not, and whether I was in a thriving state or not, unless I knew who had got the money and whether any of it was mine. But that had nothing to do with it. It was not in the figures at all. So she's saying basically, well, I want to know who's got the money. If only one person has all the money, or only a few people have all the money, and if I don't have any money, then maybe I'm not living in a thriving state. But no, the answer is how much GDP, right? What's the gross domestic product of our nation? That's how you know if it's a rich nation or not. Who cares who has the money? And then, of course, she confuses the word statistics with stutterings, which is kind of funny. It's not necessarily ironic, but it is funny. And then she's talking about the millions, and I thought it would be just as hard upon those who were starved, whether the others were a million or a million, but that was wrong too. So it's kind of ironic because she actually can't get rid of this human feeling, and she thinks that makes her dumb, right? But it doesn't. That's the irony there, is it actually makes her a good person, but she's being valued as a lesser person because of that. And so there's lots of irony throughout the text. There's even places, and you'll see this if you pay attention in the second book, where the narrator will say something that sounds like the opposite of what the story's trying to say, and he's kind of winking. He's usually saying it in an ironic way. If he says that, someone says something like a jerk, and he's like, someone said, someone took that as a wonderful compliment. No, they didn't. It's just a lot of irony. And you might even call it sarcasm. I guess that's pretty much it. Again, most of the time, except for when we have these two longer books, this one and toward the end of the semester, we've got a longer text, which we'll be spending weeks on. Most of those times, most of the time, other than those times, I'll be talking in these little videos to give you some context on the text we're about to read. But I already did that. You're already reading it. So I'm about to wrap this up. I just want to point out one last thing, and that's just that whenever characters in a book or the narrator suggests that things are about to get better, buckle up, because that's usually not what's going to happen. And of course, that's an element of irony too. After Louisa agrees to marry Bounderby, Tom's excited because she's really only doing it to benefit his career aspirations. But Tom says, I say, my dear Lou, ain't it uncommonly jolly now? Right? So Tom thinks everything's going to be great. You might as well in your head hear dun 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 when characters or the narrator suggests that everything's going to be on the up and up now. I mean, unless it's the last page of the book. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Enjoy the second part. And look, the discussion questions are posted as well. I again suggest that you read those before and during your readings as much as possible. You can access them on the Blackboard app. That's an awesome idea. So you can have the questions in mind as you read. And as always, you have my email address. Please don't hesitate to use it. There's only one T in there, so I can get it. And let me know if you have any questions or having any issues. Otherwise, like I said, enjoy book 2 of Hard Times.